Joe Budden and his co-hosts probably need a moment of silence to process what just happened. Because just a week ago, they were confidently predicting that Drake was done. Not struggling, not falling off slightly. Done. Budden even went as far as to call Drake a corpse, suggesting that his career was lifeless, that he was moving without impact, that his days of dominance were over. And his co-hosts, they co-signed it. They sat there, laughing, agreeing, doubling down on the idea that Drake wouldn't even be able to push past 100K or maybe, at best, 150K in first-week sales. But now, reality has hit them like a freight train. The numbers are in, and they tell a story that completely shatters everything Budden and his crew said. Drake and PartyNextDoor's joint album just did a staggering 250,000 copies in its first week. And this wasn't with the usual push that a Drake album gets. There was no massive label rollout, no over-the-top industry support, no prime placement on streaming services. In fact, by all industry standards, this album was set up to underperform. It wasn't getting the same love from Universal Music Group. It wasn't being pushed heavily on Apple Music. Spotify wasn't throwing it into every major playlist like they usually would for an artist of Drake's caliber. It was Drake versus the industry. And yet, even with the odds seemingly stacked against him, he still broke through. This moment is bigger than just another successful Drake album. It's bigger than just another big first-week sales number. This is about proving something that Budden and his crew, along with many others in the industry, have been refusing to acknowledge. Drake isn't just a product of the system. He isn't an artist who only thrives when the industry decides to back him. He isn't someone who needs the labels, the playlists, the algorithms, or the industry executives to manufacture his success. The numbers prove that Drake's power is real, organic, and deeply rooted in the people. Budden and his co-hosts sat there with all the confidence in the world, predicting failure. They analyzed, they debated, they dissected every possible scenario, and they came to the conclusion that Drake's time was up, that he wouldn't be able to pull strong numbers anymore, that people were moving on, that his fan base wasn't as engaged as before. And for some reason, they were convinced that they were right. They were certain that the Drake wave had finally lost momentum. But now they have to face the reality that they were dead wrong. And the worst part? They weren't just a little wrong. They were completely, undeniably, embarrassingly wrong. Because let's break this down further. This wasn't a mainstream-heavy album. This wasn't a radio-driven album. This wasn't a heavily marketed project that was getting promo from every corner of the industry. This was a project that had every reason to underperform if you go by standard industry logic. And yet, it didn't just perform well, it dominated. There's something about this that has to sting for Budden. For years, he has positioned himself as one of the most important voices in hip-hop commentary. He's built a podcast empire off the back of his ability to break down artists, critique their careers, and analyze the state of the culture. His audience trusts his opinion. And when he says something with confidence, people listen. But what happens when that confidence is completely misplaced? What happens when all of that analysis, all of that conviction, all of those facts he swore by turn out to be completely off base? What happens when the numbers prove that Budden and his crew don't actually understand the level of power Drake still holds? There's no hiding from the truth here. 250K first-week sales is not a fluke. It's not a lucky break. It's not some unexpected surprise that can be easily explained away. It's proof that Drake's name still carries weight, that his fan base is still engaged, and that his impact is still undeniable. And the biggest part of this? He did it without the industry's backing. That's the part that should have everyone talking. Because we live in an era where streaming numbers are heavily influenced by algorithms, where artists rely on placement in key playlists to drive their streams, where record labels orchestrate success by ensuring that albums get prime promotion. And when that doesn't happen, most albums flop. Drake's didn't. And that tells you something. That tells you that the people still want to hear what he has to say. That tells you that his music still resonates. That tells you that, despite all the criticism, despite all the narratives being pushed against him, he is still one of the biggest artists in the world. Now, Budden and his team are sitting there, having to process all of this. And for the first time in a long time, they don't have much to say. Because how do you argue with the numbers? How do you spin this in a way that doesn't make you look completely off base? How do you backtrack after being so confidently wrong? The truth is, you don't. You just sit there and accept that Drake proved you wrong. This is a moment that will be talked about for a long time because it highlights something bigger than just a single album success. It highlights the disconnect between hip-hop media and reality. Because hip-hop media, especially people like Budden, love to push narratives. They love to decide when an artist's time is up. They love to paint a picture of decline before it actually happens. But this album just proved something crucial. They don't get to decide that. The industry doesn't get to decide that. The blogs don't get to decide that. The streaming platforms don't get to decide that. The people decide. And the people have spoken. Drake isn't a corpse. He isn't fading away. He isn't struggling to stay relevant. He just did 250K first week with an album that wasn't even set up for success. If that's what a corpse looks like, then every other artist in the game should be praying to have a career this dead. Budden can try to spin it however he wants. He can try to find a new angle, try to downplay the numbers, try to say that it's just his core fan base, or that numbers don't mean everything. But the reality is clear. Drake isn't going anywhere. And the next time Budden wants to confidently predict Drake's downfall, he might want to take a step back and remember this moment. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that counting out Drake is always a mistake.